So my name is Jordan Avellino. I am the school adjustment counselor for Hampton Charter West. I have a master's in education with my license in school counseling, and I've been working with the school for 1.5 years, give or take now. So as the title is here, this webinar will be talking on improving parent-child communication and some methods to do that, along with some studies that I found for your benefit to help you in terms of communicating with children and students of all ages. So quick overview of what we're going to be going over briefly tonight. I'm going to go over a literature review, just some studies and findings of those studies in terms of parent-child communication and the effect that the quality of that communication can have. Then we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of it. Parent-child communication, some barriers to effective communication, and then the opposite, of course, helpful methods to facilitate communication with your student or child. And then 3, counselor corner. I want to talk a little bit on how to actually talk / listen like a counselor, give you some helpful advice, some tips and tricks that I use essentially every day to help facilitate open communication with students. And then at the end, there will be a Q&A session. So I will ask for everybody right now to, if you have any questions, please keep them in mind or write them down during the presentation. There will be time at the end if you do have any questions for me that we can try to answer. And I will do my best to give you answers that are, workable for you. So let's get right into it. All right, so parent-child communication and academic performance. So this was a study done in 2020, and it was examining the effects of parent-child communication and on academic performance. So this was a longitudinal study of 9,000 students nationwide. It was done here in the US from grades K to 8. And then the focus of this study also wanted to talk on how the 8th graders were moving into high school as well, and how parent-child communication affected their thoughts on high school and their academic performance entering high school as well. So one of the main points of the study in terms of explaining the effect good parent-child communication could have on academic achievement was the use of self-concept. And self-concept is basically how the child themselves perceive their own abilities, behavior, and personality. It's very closely related to, self-concept is very related to self-esteem, of course, but it's like more holistic, where they essentially all parts of themselves, their personality, abilities, behaviors, what they think about themselves essentially. And the study used that as a mediator to explain the effects and any correlations that the study found. Another thing that the study looked at was the quality versus quantity argument. So they wanted to know, is it really just the quality of conversations we're having with our students that produces an effect on academic performance? Is it quantity, actually? So the number of conversations you have with them? Or is it both, or which one basically has a bigger effect? So the study was looking at all those facets in terms of academic performance and parent-child communication. So we'll go into the findings here. So as you may have guessed, of course, as expected, high quality parent communication had a positive effect on student academic performance. High quality communication facilitated a positive self-concept for the student, which typically led to stronger academic achievement. So of course, no surprises there. And this was a study that was confirmed by multiple other studies done in the past. So it fits in with the current literature that good parent-child communication obviously leads to higher academic achievement and does play a good role. However, the study did not find a significant correlation between quantity of communication and achievement. So suggesting that maybe the quality of conversations we're having with our school-age children has a stronger effect. And also the study suggested that because they didn't find a significant correlation between quantity and academic achievement, it could be related to children's need for autonomy as they grow. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this in a later slide, but I just wanted to touch upon it now that essentially as they grow older, we all know this, right? Kids like to, be more autonomous, have more control, have more agency, you know, in terms of control of their lives, especially in school and at home. So the study was suggesting that having too many of these types of conversations too often might lead to, might be the reason for why the quantity is not having as much an effect as the quality of the communication we're having with our children. So that's something just to keep in mind, and we will touch base on that a little bit after as well. So speaking of, what does high quality communication look like? This is according to the study. These are a few factors that the study found that they defined as high quality communication, and we'll go over these a little bit more in depth as well later on in the webinar. But for the study, high quality communication, so truly listening and respecting the child's perspective, of course, right? We want to meet the kids where they're at and then work from there. Understand where their emotions may be coming from. Provide them with meaningful feedback when appropriate. Invite them to have an active part in the decision-making process, choosing rewards, consequences, for example. Again, going back to the agency and control, kids, children of all ages do like, you know, options, and they do like to be an active participant whenever you're, you know, working on either rewards, punishments, or just even anything as small as what we're gonna have for dinner today, right? Inviting them to be active participants in their own decisions will actually help lead to more autonomy later on. And if they can feel confident in their own, it leads to a higher self-concept. If they're confident in their own abilities to, like, you know, make decisions, it leads to a higher self-concept, which of course, as we discussed before, can lead to higher grades and academic achievement and other positive benefits as well. As I mentioned previously, though, too many of these conversations, however, may decrease student autonomy and identity. Essentially, if we just, you know, talk about it too much with them, the study did suggest that because kids do have a need, kind of an innate drive, right, to be independent and make their own decisions, essentially, if we do too much of it and try to make too many of those decisions with them, it kind of decreases their ability to be autonomous and to be independent from us and make their own decisions apart from the parents. So the study didn't necessarily say that, like, you know, having too many of these conversations with our students was a bad thing per se. However, they did want us to be aware, and wants the parents, of course, to be aware that these conversations, we want to give room for the kid as well to A, make their own decisions, and B, you know, sometimes make their own mistakes as well. So that's why they didn't find a correlation between quantity of conversations, but the quality, of course, is important. And later on, we'll go over other methods of effective and high quality communication with our, you know, student population to help improve academic performance, among other things as well. So that was the first study. We'll go into briefly for a second study here too. So another study done in 2016 examined similar things, the relationship between perceived parent-child communication and well-being. So I want to take of note here, this study only went from student self-report. It was out of 809 adolescent participants. So this was more, you know, 13 plus students. And they wanted to see how the child's perceived, how they perceived the quality of their parent, of the communication with their parent, how it affected their well-being across different, 4 different domains. So as the study defined them, it was across rating scales that they used for depression, substance use, self-esteem, and school adjustment. So they took basically the ratings that the child gave for the quality of parent communication, and they compared it with the rating scales for these different factors here. The study also was kind of unique in that it took a brief look at some gender differences in communication with with children and the effect that they had on well-being as well. So we'll go into the findings here. So while there were some gender differences, again, no surprises here, it was discovered that both paternal and maternal communication, so from father and mother, contributed significantly, and it significantly predicted child well-being. No surprises there. Especially when both parents are involved. It led to greater outcomes for their well-being across the 4 domains. Open communication and high quality communication with parents had an inverse relationship with the 4 areas of well-being. So in other words, the higher the perceived quality of communication, the less depressive symptoms were reported, the less substance use reported, higher self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, the better the communication that was going on with parents at these ages, especially at the high school level, it led to, it predicted lower scores on depressive symptoms, substance abuse, and was better for, and less school adjustment problems as well. As I said before, with some of the gender differences, female students did report more positive / frequent interactions with parents. Again, like the study did say that maternal and paternal communication was was a good predictor of well-being. But female students did, compared to the male students in this study, did report that they were having either more of these conversations or that the quality of the conversations they were having were more frequent as opposed to male students. I do want to note though, and of course, any psych program that you go into will let you know this. Any program worth its salt will let you know that in the field of psychology, correlation does not equal causation. So good parent communication, obviously, as we've discussed, does play a positive role, but it does not immediately mean it causes better well-being in students. It's related, right? And it definitely plays a role, but it doesn't mean that having these conversations will automatically lead to, better well-being, higher outcomes. As we all know, raising kids can be a very difficult endeavor, and nothing is as simple as it seems. It's not ever always one-to-one. So while good parent-child communication obviously plays a positive role and has a positive effect, we can't say for certain that it's the cause of, student well-being and the cause of student academic achievement. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood that little psych thing that I got from my programs. So now I want to briefly, before we go into, with some good ways of talking to our school-age children, I want to talk first on some of the barriers to effective communication that are common. And, no one's perfect. This has happened, and we are all guilty at one point or other in our lives of doing some of these things. But catching ourselves when we do it and then, striving to be better when we make these mistakes is exactly how we model, good communication skills for our students. So it's helpful to go over what might not work as well with specific students. So nagging, lecturing / preaching. So as we know, it takes a while for kids to get, ideas, concepts, lessons in their heads sometimes, and we can repeat ourselves, ad nauseum until we're blue in the face. But too much obviously can cause children to stop listening entirely if we just repeat over and over everything. Sometimes it's better for if it's something that the child is not supposed to be doing, just to give out the consequence or let them know what they're doing is wrong instead of saying over and over again the expectation or what you want, because they know it by now. But if you repeat it, sometimes they just might stop listening entirely because you've said it so often. Interrupting. Constantly stopping the child from talking may cause them to believe you don't care about their perspective. This one is very important. As we said, we want to model good communication skills for our school-age children. And interrupting is one where it might show the kid you don't really care what they are trying to say, and you're trying to get your point in, but across before they can. Communication should never be a battle. Sometimes, obviously, it feels like one, but communication should be, two-way street, and everybody should get their chance to chime in. And this is especially important with our kids. So interrupting, constantly stopping them from talking, saying your own point instead, might not necessarily be the most effective method of communication, of course. This one is big too. As a counselor, I believe this one is a huge one that we should always try to avoid: denying feelings. Typically never a good idea to tell children that you shouldn't feel like this way, right? You shouldn't feel like X because, someone had it worse or I've had it worse here. You never usually want to tell them that because you may be invalidating what they are feeling. All emotions, whether or not we think it's rational, right? The school-aged child and the adolescent too, right? Go through a whole slew of emotions every single day. And those emotions, as we know, can change literally on a second-to-second basis. So it's typically always a good idea to just validate their emotions and normalize it. Whether or not we agree and whether or not we actually see where they're coming from, letting a child know that it's okay to feel how they're feeling is usually always a good idea. And of course, the opposite, denying their feelings is usually not a good idea, especially if you're trying to have effective communication with the kid. And put downs, right? Insults. Even if they're doing something clearly wrong or something that you told them they shouldn't be doing, right? Insulting children, again, almost never works and it can lead to resentment and it might decrease future opportunities for conversations with the kids. They might not want to share things with you simply because they feel like you might put them down. Obviously, it's usually never a parent's intent to do so, so we always have to watch what we say. But openly insulting them for whatever they're going through, or if they're making a mistake, typically leads to like lower amounts of communication in the future with them. So you always want to like foster that relationship, that rapport with the student by just not putting them down is always a good start for sure. Okay, before we get into the some of the methods for effective communication I found and some that I also use as a counselor, I wanted to make sure for any parents that are either watching or in the audience today, that it is very, very important to know that you are the expert of your own child. And I want you to treat yourself as such, okay? All information that I'm giving you and any advice you receive, of course, has to be viewed in the context of your specific relationship with your child, okay? There's obviously a whole bunch of books out there. There's a whole bunch of psych reviews. There's a whole bunch of studies, right, that talk about, effective communication with your child this, effective ways to talk with your child that. And it's all fair and valid for sure. However, all those studies have not worked with your specific child, right? You know your child best, so you should treat yourself as the expert, and you should know what may work and what might not work, right? So like it says here, right? Some advice might work personally for you and your child, other advice might not. So all the advice and information you get, including with this webinar today, needs to be weighed in the context of your parenting style, right? Your personality, and essentially your child's personality as well. So an example I like to use here in terms of always like, take information and make it specific to your relationship with the child is sarcasm, right? Some people, myself included, are more naturally sarcastic than others, right? And sarcasm with kids can be, always a hit or miss, right? If you don't have the proper relationship with the kid, to like that they understand maybe some of the jokes or some of the quips you're making with your sarcasm, it can be a barrier to effective communication and could actually lead to like lowering your rapport with the kid because they don't get the joke. But in other cases with specific children, right, sarcasm is actually helpful and it can increase rapport and it can increase like, effective communication when the child needs it simply because, they understand your humor, they get your style, or they're similar to, you basically have a similar wavelength, right? So sarcasm is a big one. You always want to use what you're naturally good at, but also in the context of your relationship with the child. Some kids I work with, sometimes it's okay to be sarcastic once in a while. And some other kids I refrain from doing so because I know it won't work personally for them. And it's all in the context of your relationship with the child. So as parents, I want you guys to treat yourselves as the experts of your own child as we go through some of these methods of effective communication. So what are some methods to increase effective communication with our school-age children? One, and this was said a little bit before, right? Communicate at your child's level, right? Use age-appropriate words and ideas to meet where your child is at mentally and emotionally. Remember, a child's mental and emotional state can be, it can change very, very quickly. Like I said, almost to a second-to-second basis. So you have to meet your child where they're at, right? At some points, it might not be effective to talk when, emotions are running high and there's lots of frustration going on. Sometimes it would be better to wait, right? And again, it has to be developmentally appropriate. You know how to talk to your child depending on what age they are, of course, and what concepts they do understand and what concepts they don't understand. So it's always good to always take your child's mental and emotional level in mind when you're having any type of conversation with your children. Be aware of length of time. Conversations where you need the kid to understand something typically work better when you get, right to the point and are brief. This doesn't mean that you can't have a back and forth, right? This doesn't mean you can't have a banter with your child. It's actually good if you have banter with your child because that means they're engaging and talking with you, right? But sometimes when you need a lesson to be said or something, it's always good to to get to your point quickly and go from there, right? Conversations that kind of go on and drag on for the kid, they might, start losing interest and they might forget the lesson you're trying to tell them entirely, right? So it's always good to be aware of how long you're having these conversations when you do have them with your children. As we mentioned before, right? Respect the child's perspective. Even if you don't agree with what they're either currently complaining about or going through, and it's going to be likely that you will not agree or not necessarily see fully their perspective, right? It's always okay to let your child know that you understand slash respect their opinion or their perspective. This helps with engagement, right? If a child feels like you at least will respect what they're, going through, or at least like give them the time to explain their emotions and feelings, it can lead to higher rapport. And higher rapport leads to them telling more of the things that you would want to know as a parent, right? Some of the things that they are going through so that you can help them better. So respecting the child's perspective and meeting them where they're at are obviously two very good ways of increasing effective communication with kids, as well as being aware, of course, of length of time you're having these um, communication sessions with kids. And basically when you're talking. Some other ones here. Like we said before, have the child be an active participant. Whenever we're brainstorming, talking on solutions to problems or figuring out rewards, like I said before, having the child work with you and talking with them and letting them have a choice helps promote autonomy and inclusion. So again, like I said before, kids, especially nowadays, are really always kind of vying for control, right? They want to know what they can control, what they can't control. But more often than not, they're trying to have some small amount of control, especially with the craziness that is daily life, as we all know. So having the child be an active participant and letting them talk with you and making some decisions, and it can be even minor decisions, right? It doesn't have to be anything like huge, like, figuring out a big reward or getting a PS5 for good behavior, right? Um, it can be anything as small as grocery shopping, what to get for dinner, anything that you talk with your child about, right? But giving them options is always usually helpful. Admitting mistakes slash not knowing something. So I do this literally almost on a daily basis. Never be afraid to admit mistakes, or if you've messed up, or if you don't know something that the child asks you about, right? It normalizes this and it makes them feel that it's okay if they don't know something or if they're wrong about something, right? So again, modeling is very, very huge. Kids take after what they see, right? Kids take after what they hear. So if they see, the adult role models in their life, and this goes for not only parents, right? But educators, anybody who works with children, right? If we let them know that it's okay to make mistakes, and if we admit them ourselves, it makes them more likely to also be okay if they don't know something and if they're wrong, because we've normalized it, okay? So it's always very helpful to it's never a bad thing to tell a kid, I don't know, but let's figure that out together, right? Let's find out together the answer and go from there. I've used it all the time and it always works 100%. And then big one. This one should have been first, of course, but one of the best ways to have effective communication, not only with school children, but literally anybody on earth, is listening, right? Listening is the most important part of communicating, no contest. Truly listening to children will increase engagement, rapport, and increases the chances of a positive relationship. And as we discussed earlier, if we do have a positive relationship with the kid, it leads to better outcomes for them, both social emotionally and academically as well. So listening is always big. So on the topic of listening, I want to briefly just give you some advice in terms of how to listen effectively when you're having talks with kids. But this could also be with anybody, right? So I'm gonna give you a little counseling corner here real quick. So how to listen like a counselor. Body language is important, right? Some of the nonverbal, some of the things that we don't actually say, but show that the kid that we're interested in what they're saying and we're engaged can be huge actually sometimes. So eye contact, right? Not too much, obviously, but not too little, right? You always want to make sure you're, keeping, engaged with eye contact, making sure that you're, leaning forward, open posture so that you seem open and approachable. These are all good things to let the kid know that you're at least listening to what they have to say. You can do this standing, sitting, but basically the eye contact, open posture, non-defensive, right? And then sometimes leaning forward and letting them know like, hey, I'm listening to you and what you're saying is important, goes a long way towards increasing rapport. An active listening method that I use every day is reflection, right? Which essentially is you repeat back what the person is saying, just kind of in a different way or your own interpretation to let them know that you were listening to them and you were engaging. Reflecting is not a 100% like, you might not always be accurate in what you say back to them, but never be afraid to let them, correct you if you've like, missed the mark sometimes. But just the fact that you are reflecting what they're saying and giving it back to them lets them know, hey, they were listening to me, right? So reflecting is a very big piece, and I use it every day in counseling practice to let them know that you're actively listening and engaging with what they're saying. Another active listening technique is summarizing. So again, especially if we're having these like longer types of discussions, right? Summarizing the key points and info a person is telling you so that you were paying attention and you were listening to them throughout. So summarization and reflecting are two big ones that I use basically on a day-to-day basis to let the kids know I'm listening to them, I'm here for you, let's figure this out together. And then I know I said that listening is super important, but obviously all conversations are a two-way street. I want to talk briefly on how to talk like a counselor, or just one of the things that you can do that makes you talk more like a counselor when you're engaging with both school children or basically anybody in your life. Active listening technique, open questions and statements. Questions, of course, keep any conversation going. Open-ended questions related to what a person is telling you keeps them engaged and keeps them talking. And of course, it gives you more information. Closed questions typically are not conducive to facilitating deeper conversation. So what do these look like? So an example of closed questioning is usually any type of your yes/no questions, things that the kid could easily just say yes or no, and it would just be done, right? They won't give you any more clarifying information. The conversation doesn't go deeper because they could easily just say yes, no, and they don't need to give you anything else because the question wasn't set up to give you more, right? So examples of closed questioning, right? Do you have a good relationship with your parents? Do you like your job? Stuff like that. Easily the kid or anybody, right, could be, yeah, I do, or no, right, I don't. Do you like your job? Yes, no, maybe so. But they don't have to give you any more than that because the question is kind of closed, right? You can easily answer it with a yes or no. Now contrast this with the open-ended questions and statements, right? Tell me about your relationship with your parents, or why did you pick your job? These are more open-ended because you can't easily just be like, if somebody asked you, right? Tell me about your relationship with your parents. You just can't say yes, right? You would have to give a little bit more information because the way of the nature of the question is more open, right? So it facilitates more conversation. Why did you pick this job, right? Instead of do you like it or not, which is the yes or no. Why did you pick your job? Opens up the conversation for anything they want to talk about specifically with their job, and it'll give you more information about that person, which is very crucial if you're trying to understand them, like in the case with kids, right? Or if you're trying to help them through something, the more information that you retain and actively listen to, the better for engagement and rapport, and the better chances of you, coming to a positive outcome of the conversation you're having with the kid, or basically anybody in your life that you use these techniques with. So again, like I said before, open questions and statements. I do use this every day and it's very, very helpful. It's kind of difficult to know when you're asking kind of a closed question or an open question. So it's something that you have to, kind of practice at. I'm not pretending like I'm a perfect person at it as well. Sometimes I do find myself doing more closed questions, but you can always follow up. So it's just a thing to be, aware of in our conversations, but especially with our children, right? We want to let them know that we are actively listening. And like I've said before with this webinar, when they know that we're listening to them, it can lead to more positive outcomes for both you as the parent and the child. And I believe that is it for me. These are the sources that I have cited. You can take a look at them. I do highly recommend also parentinged.org, where I got a lot of my information from in terms of methods of communicating effectively with children. So these should be available after the webinar as well. And you can take a look at some of these links. I highly recommend just taking a quick look at some of these for sure. And I believe that's it in terms of my webinar for here. I want to thank everybody for listening, of course. And now I want to see if anybody has a question. I can try my best to venture an answer. If you want to either unmute yourselves or you can put it in the chat and I will do my best. to answer your question. Otherwise, you can let me know, and I want to thank everybody for your time.